Hello and welcome to Eternal Durdles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Bleckman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Yo, what's up, dude? You ready for round two?
Let's do this again. We recorded this yesterday, and I didn't hit the record button, so we're doing it one more time. We're going to talk about all the cards we talked about live yesterday. We're actually going to do the whole podcast all over again, just for you. So don't forget to like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe twice after. It's actually
Please,
surprising that given how long we've been doing the podcast, that this is the first time I feel like that's happened in a meaningful way where we were like, oh, we were really deep into it, and now
this hasn't happened since we did an interview with Eric Virgo. That was last time that happened, and I had to call him up days later and be like, we need to do this all over again.
We definitely need to get Virgo back on the podcast. That's for sure.
We do. The only other time something as catastrophic as that happened was the time that my mic dropped out for a time with you and Nate, and I went back and just said what I had said.
Oh, that's right. I remember you doing that. Yeah. That's content. That's
insane.
That's called fixing it in post. That's
legit fixing it in post. I wish I had my shirt from yesterday so I could say fix it in pre. That's a legit fix it in post situation. So anyhow, we're going to talk about the Dominaria United spoilers again today. And before we get right into that, I wanted to talk about I went to the Eminence MTG event for competitive EDH CDH tournament, just to hang out with some friends and stuff. And while I was there, you know who I saw?
Eric Virgo.
No, not Eric Virgo. No, I saw my buddy Harry and my buddy Mike as well. But nice. We all know Harry from MoxField.
Oh, we love MoxField.
Let's talk about MoxField. Yeah, MoxField is an amazing website, moxfield.com. Links are below to our own pages and the show's page. You can go to moxfield.com, and it's a deck building website that is great for EDH. It's great for Legacy. You don't need an app. It all works right from your browser on PC, on Mac. It works on your Android phone. It works on your iPhone. Amazing. You should be using this. You're gonna win. You're gonna win more matches. Also, it's great in EDH if you're one of those people who takes forever to tutor, and you can have your list right up there and be like, "This is the card I need." But anyhow, go to moxfield.com. Sign in, create an account. It's free. This is the gold standard in deck building websites.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, some of the things that you're able to do on MoxField are pretty insane. Like being able to sift through your cards by what they do, by function, is just so sick.
Yeah,
it's just
it's using the full suite of Scryfall to figure out how that stuff works. So
you're literally like, I just want to know all of the things that sacrifice a creature and the color that they're in, and you can just sift them exactly into the. It's so good.
Yep. All right. Well, let's start talking about Dominaria United, which is out on the 9th of next month. We're on today is the 31st.
Yeah, I know it's out. It's out before the next event that I'm going to go to is the Legacy Pit Open on October 1st, and I know that this set is legal for that tournament. So there's going to be a short window of testing with the new cards before a big major Legacy tournament. So
let's talk about cards that we think may see play in Legacy, and maybe some traps too. But let's start with
a lot of traps
by talking about Serra Paragon. Serra Paragon is a 4-mana that's 2/2 white angel with flying. That is a 3/4, and it says once during your turn you may play a land from your graveyard, cast a permanent. You may play a land from your graveyard to cast a permanent.
I got this one. You got me? I got you.
Yeah, please go. I think this reading is wrong. Go on.
It's 2/2 white for a 3/4 flying angel. It says once during each of your turns, you may play a land from your graveyard or cast a permanent spell with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard. If you do, it gains when this permanent is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, exile it, and you gain 2 life. So it's sort of doing like a Lutri thing.
Yeah, like a Luris thing. Yeah.
It's very similar text to Luris.
I want to just say that was not a dyslexia situation. Mythic spoiler actually has the wording incorrect on this.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
But for Serra Paragon, I do love me some angels. I'm an angel guy. I like angels and I like sphinges, which is the correct plural of sphinx. Sphinges, or sphinges. Same thing for Strix. The proper plural for Strix is stringes.
A group of sphinxes is called?
A group of sphinxes.
Sphinges.
A group of sphinges.
You know what that's called?
I'm a riddle of sphinges.
You're correct.
Oh
correct.
yeah,
There's
of course. I know
of,
my. Come on, man. I know my sphinx. I know my.
You know
sphinx.
your cryptozoology group
I
names?
know it all, man. I'm a primatologist. All right.
You
so
know
Serra
what about
Paragon,
what about? Oh yeah, please talk about.
you want to wait? You want to test me on group names for mythical creatures?
One more. Do you know what a unicorn is?
Yeah, constellation of unicorn, bro.
No, it's a miracle of unicorns, my guy.
Ah, damn it!
All right, so let's actually talk about Serra Paragon, though.
So this is really close to what Luris's text is, which is why it's interesting. I think that at a 4-mana 3/4 that gets around Bolt, that gets around Pyroblast, it's like exactly the right stats to like carve where removal is right now.
Yep.
That isn't white. Although it is hard to hit with a prismatic ending. The issue that I see with Serra Paragon and why I think it's going to be more fringy than anything else is that the benefit of Luris was one, it was a mana cheaper. Yeah. Two, its casting cost wasn't necessarily as restrictive, even though it was hybrid Orzhov. Yeah. Hybrid mana is really closer to colorless mana than it is to restrictive mana, right?
Yeah.
So and also the fact that like Serra Paragon, if you think about it in comparison to Luris is the greatest creature of all time, right? Like the fact that Luris never took a draw step. You always just had it. You never had to spend a draw step drawing it. Where Serra Paragon you do, and it's going to comes in as a mana. It's a mana more expensive. Yeah. So the exile clause I think is the hindrance here. I think like if you were able to just recur the same Mishra's Bauble or whatever every turn the way that you could with Luris, then we'd be talking. The thing is that a lot of what Luris was doing was in like the Delver shell where it can rebuy the cheap creatures. And the thing is that at 4-mana 3/4 is not where your like cheap 1-mana threats deck is going to be reaching for a critical creature, right? A critical value creature.
Exactly.
So Luris was extremely incidental, right? Companion just lets you have it, and it didn't cost you anything. Whereas Serra Paragon, like there are some restrictions in there. I don't know. I think like I'm gonna test it. I'm gonna see if it's worth playing because I mean, like if it goes unchecked, it is just recursive of a fetch land every turn. Or if you are playing with cheaper permanents, I think that because it doesn't rebuy, if it rebuyed anything that was mana value 3 or less, it would be a slam dunk. But because it's only permanents, you really have to think in mind, what are you looking to rebuy unless you are just trying to grind. And if you're trying to grind, I think there are just better 4-drops to play.
Exactly. I think one of the things we should discuss about this card is what sort of decks we could see it taking place in. So like I could see this being a role player card, maybe a 1/2 of in like Death and Taxes, because they have plenty of permanents to get back.
Yeah, I think like if you're in the market for playing a recursion creature in D&T, you're probably just on extraction specialist. Is that what it's called?
I think so.
Yeah, that 3/2 is actually tutorable with all of your with recruiter, and it's gonna get back everything that you more or less want anyway. Like it can't rebuy Solitude or whatever, but neither can Serra Paragon. So it's like I think extraction specialist is just like the better target for doing the thing that it's doing because it's more efficient. And it already has lifelink on the body. So it's like, and D&T doesn't play fetch land, so you're not going to get, like, I don't think Serra Paragon's anywhere close to D&T. But if it sees play anywhere, I think it will be in like a blue-white X.
Maybe another piece in the Jeskai control lists that are floating around.
I mean, the more that we talk about it, the more I'm finding myself off of it, particularly after we discussed it yesterday.
Since we discussed it for like 20 minutes yesterday, too.
I was high on talking about it yesterday, and then now that we've had time to sit on and reflect on like what we talked about and the shells that it can go in, it just seems too fringy.
Yeah.
But like if it shows up, like if somebody casts it against me, I'm not going to be shocked. Like it is a strong creature, but I don't think it's going to be rearranging any or. I don't think it's efficient enough to solve the problems for the decks that are looking for something like this.
Cool. All right. Well, let's talk about Sheoldred, the Apocalypse, which is a 4-mana 4/5. That's 2 and 2 black for a Death Touch creature that says whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life. Whenever your opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. Now, yesterday we were talking about how this could be the finishing piece of a combo, sort of the part that enables like you to do the Jeskai undoing part, but like not using the Jeskai part, obviously. To do like 14 damage to an opponent.
I liked the idea that if this sees play at all, it's not going to be for the fact that it's a 4/5 body. It's going to be for the fact that it's a combo piece.
Yeah.
And so the idea that I remember when Echo of Eons first came out, and everybody was like, holy shit, like LED Echo is going to be Nutter Butters. And then people were playing it. Obviously, they immediately paired it with Narset or Leovold. And then we're looking for ways to actually combo kill. And there wasn't, I mean, that's effectively a game win anyway, but it moved more towards a mid-range deck that eventually just became the Jeskai Days Undoing Planeswalker control deck with an incidental Days Undoing finish.
Yeah.
Where I think that if anybody is going to play with Sheoldred, it's going to be in a combo wheel deck. So like a Days Undoing Echo of Eons, combo deck where you can power out Sheoldred through things like Dark Ritual. So you could just play a faster combo.
Yeah.
And it also being in black gives you Entomb, so you can entomb your Echo. So you can sort of get combos that way. And the 4/5 just incidentally will also give you a backdoor beatdown plan in that it is a pretty fast clock, considering that it's whenever your opponent draws a card, you gain 2 life. And then when you draw cards, you can check their combat steps.
Yeah.
So
it's an 8-point life swing every turn, right? Like it's not nothing.
It's not nothing. There is something to like there, particularly if you're interested in playing like a blue-black combo deck that already is interested in fast mana and ancient tombs, the way that Echo of Eons or Days Undoing and now this would be, that you can really lean into that that axis of like you are getting ahead on mana, and then you have a bunch of ways to reload because you're a bunch of wheels in your deck.
I think a final note on this card also is if your opponent has to dig to kill it, they're ostensibly taking like 6 damage.
They just die.
Like that's no good for them. So if they have to cast Brainstorm or Ponder, that's a lot. That's a lot to just like get rid of a guy. Basically has like ward 6 life.
I think that like the combination between Hull Breacher, Narset, Echo, Days Undoing, Sheoldred, like if you're just in blue-black cards and you already have the disruption, like granted, you're normally discard is not really effective when you're wheeling, but in this case, you just want to wheel once and end the game. So like clearing the way with discard spells and also clearing the way to like make sure that they don't have removal for your creatures when you combo off. Like I could see that doing stuff because you get both the disruptive element of discard, the protective elements of blue cards, and then just all of your creatures do like disrupt the format in meaningful ways because this is a format about drawing cards. So I think that like that's the only shell I can realistically think of Sheoldred appearing in. Everything else I think would be too cute, given that this idea is already pretty cute.
Yeah, it's pretty cute. So let's move on to a card I don't want to talk about for too long. It's Stronghold Arena. This is a 2-mana enchantment, 1 in a black that has kicker green or white. If you kick it, you gain 3 life for each time it was kicked. And then it says whenever 1 or more creatures you control dealt combat damage to a player, you may reveal the top card of your deck and put it into your hand. If you do, you lose life equal to the mana cost. This card looked a lot better to me yesterday when I thought that it was just Dark Confidant every turn. But it's not. It has to connect. So you really have to build around this. Get your ninjas going and stuff. And we were discussing the ninja situation wherein that ninjas actually cost a lot of mana sometimes.
Yeah.
You're cheating those in off of the ninjutsu ability. So that can really be a problem with this card as well.
This is also not a type of this is not a card that you would see in a ninja shell because it doesn't actually enable ninjas, and ninjas already do what it does, which is draw cards. Like they do, the idea I think like I don't think this is good enough to see play. It's a contextual Dark Confidant that's not guaranteed to hit because removal can just stop this from doing anything.
This is a dead draw board, if you just draw it,
it does nothing. Yeah. So I think that the only world that this exists in is if you have to have enough 1-drops that you would go 1-drop, play a 1-drop, play this, attack, Dark Confidant trigger, and now you're up a card. But I can't think of any deck that's doing that where they're not just playing Expressive Iteration. They're just playing like if you wanted an effect like this, you're just going to play Expressive Iteration and do it better, right? And like the fact that it's kicker green white, there is no Obzon deck in the format, and there's not going to be anytime soon. Yeah. So
this would have been interesting if it was in colors that Infect would have played. We're going to talk about Infect a whole bunch later, but let's talk about the Defilers.
Yeah, I think that the Defilers are pretty straightforward. Like it's the same thing. They turn all of the permanents, colored mana into Phyrexian mana, and if they show up at all, they're just going to be combo pieces. Nobody's going to be doing anything fair with this stuff. It's just straight up like if you see it, don't be surprised. It's just part of a combo. It's not anything particularly special about them.
I think the one thing I wanted to say about these is I think the blue and the green ones are easily the most powerful just off their second abilities, like drawing a card anytime you cast a blue permanent, which is not exactly a legacy thing, and then the pumping your entire team is just so much better than like deal a point of damage or like a creature gets +1/+1 and gains menace, or like make a soldier, you know?
Yeah, I think like I mean, if there's the trick is with Defiler's pretty easy, right? You just play Defiler plus any of those 1 mana blue creatures that bounce a creature, and so you just play it bounce itself. And so if
just
you have
cards,
if you have a way to not die to paying 2 life every time you cast it, you just draw your whole deck or draw some extreme number of cards or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. All right. Yeah, you could play like Shrieking Drake or something.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the lords. So we've got a soldier lord, a merfolk lord, a cleric lord, a goblin lord, and an elf lord. So it's like 2 of these things don't belong, right?
I mean, I can appreciate that they're going back to old Dominaria tribes between clerics and soldiers.
Yeah.
It's just like those 2 are obviously the weakest because they just don't have as much support in terms of like all of the other tribes all are cohesive in usually what they do, whereas clerics are just like kind of random all over the place. And same thing with soldiers, and neither of their effects are all that great. Like sacrifice another cleric for 5 mana and you can search your library for a black creature and put it into play, is what Shadowrite Priest does as a second ability. And it's just like, if you want to put Grizzlebrand into play, there's just cheaper and more effective ways to do it. You know, you're just not like you're probably doing something that's too cute if you're playing that. And then the Valiant Veteran is just like, even in Soldier Stompy, I don't even know how decent that is, because who cares, right? Like, it's like Soldier Stompy is just a prison deck that could have any threats at the top end. But the other 3 are bangers.
Yeah, I mean, you've got goblins obviously being played a lot. Let me just turn this off because people are bothering the hell out of me right now.
Everybody pretty much is clear that the Runveld Horde Master is gonna, steer goblins into the next tier. I think that I'm a little bit quieter on Horde Master, not because I don't think it's good. It's objectively good. Like, it's going to do exceptional things because goblins is probably as close to aristocrats as we're going to get in the format. Like, it actually does a lot of things where it's sacrificing its own stuff for value, and Horde Master just kind of accentuates that, and as a 2-mana lord to boot. But I think that like the way that this is going to push goblins into the next tier, I think it's obviously a power boost, right? It's just like a more effective way at doing what it's already good at. The thing is that it doesn't do anything for goblins that goblins wasn't already like very efficient at doing. Like, goblins has always been better at out-carding opponents, right? Like, between all of the tutors and ringmasters and like ringleaders rather, goblins is very good at grinding.
Yeah, it can given enough time, goblins is going to overwhelm your average legacy opponent.
And I was going to say that the fact that this is like, you can only cast goblin creature cards off of it if you exile something. So I know that the deck has sort of been adopting Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Like, as it moves towards fewer goblins, Horde Master gets worse. Now, is Horde Master enough to push you back towards a leaner shell? I would think so, because if you just have a Skirk Prospector on the table and then just can start spamming cards off the top of your library, like, now we're talking, right? Now, particularly because you can get into War Boss, and then War Boss is just netting mana off of a off of a Skirk Prospector, and now we can start storming out and doing some shenanigans. But the fact that Horde Master doesn't solve any problems that Goblins has means that I don't think that Goblins is going to necessarily be any better in the format than it currently is. Now, it may be a better version of itself.
Maybe more popular too, just because there's renewed interest.
Like, it may be able to rebuild. It may like do things that it's going to make Goblins better at what it already does. But since it's not plugging any holes that Goblins currently has, I don't think it's going to suddenly make the deck a tier 1 tribal deck.
No, it's funny you should say that, because elves can already draw an intense amount of cards. But I think that this particular elf, again, I don't think it ups it a tier, but I think this particular elf is going to see play, mostly because that pay 1 to draw a card on every elf you could get to a point where you have what's the one that taps 3 elves and tap it and makes 3 mana?
Oh, Heritage Druid?
Yeah, so Heritage Druid. So you can start putting these down and really, like, it's like it's a mini glimpse of nature on these guys.
it gives every single elf you have kicker for green to draw a card.
Yeah.
Now, I think that like this is easily people are definitely going to try to at least as a one of starting out because it's just a green Sun Zenith target. It's pretty easy.
Yeah.
I think that like where elves has gone recently, where it's moved over to be much more grindy and almost away from elves to be closer to like a BG rock deck that just happens to have a natural order finish. I think Elf Crown or Leaf Crown Visionary might move elves back towards being very good at comboing people out faster.
Yeah.
Because now between Glimpse and Leaf Crown Visionary, plus all of the cards that can generate mana, like once you get Heritage Druid Nettle Sentinel, this just gives every elf, like every 1 mana elf is going to net a green mana off of Heritage Druid with a pair of Nettle Sentinels out, and then you're just going to draw your library. Yeah. So the fact that now you could play theoretically eight functional Glimpse of Natures in your combo elf deck, I think means that between Heritage Druid and Gaia's Cradle, you're just looking to really kill people fast. Like I think Leaf Crown might open up the avenue in the other way where Elves has gotten more grindy recently. I think this is going to could move it towards another build that's just extremely all in on trying to combo fast.
And then Vidalian Hexcatcher, being able to give every one of your creatures sacrifice for days, basically all non-creature spells. Like that's not just Curse Catcher, that's like Curse Catcher plus on every one of your guys. And I think, like we were saying yesterday, going with Tideshaper and maybe Rishidan Dockhand and like a lower to the ground deck, and then just having like something like 16 lords on top of that, because you've got and they're 2 mana lords. You've got Lord of Atlantis, Master of the Pearl Trident, the clone, the Phantasmal Image, and this. Those are all 2 mana lords. As you were saying yesterday, you can eschew all the 3-drops in your deck and decide if you want to play Trinity Nemesis or not. But this gives a lot of utility to a lot of your guys.
I think that what a problem with Merfolk right now is that when Merfolk was really good years and years and years and years ago, when you and I were but wee lads, they could pump out some of the largest creatures in tandem with each other, right?
Yeah.
When they pumped each other, they were some of the biggest creatures. The problem is that even when you have multiple lords out, you're still never going to be the biggest creature anymore. Before, the biggest thing that you had to deal with was Tarmogoyf, and Tarmogoyf was always in blue deck, so you never really had to interact with it in combat.
Correct.
Nowadays, even if you have 3 lords, you're not going to put a faster clock than Murktide is. Even with 3 lords, you're not. Even with
with 3 lords, I mean, you're looking at 3/4/4s. That is definitely bigger than a Murktide.
It's bigger, but it's dependent on it not getting broken up. You have to have them all. It means that you've spent 3 cards to just put power into play. Correct. And that's like that. You're not interacting with your opponent. That does get to interact with you. I think what Hex Mage does is by turning all of your creatures into Curse Catchers, that it makes it so you can really play a more interactive game plan. So between Tideshaper and Curse Catcher and Rishidan Dockhand, those are 3 1-drops that each interact with your opponents in meaningful ways. Curse Catcher obviously is the Force Spike ability. Tideshaper messes up their colors, and then Dockhand can tap down other colors, and so you really have an interesting color denial package.
You can really stop people that way, yeah.
Yeah, and so the fact that you have those creatures on 1, then you have Voldaren Hexcatcher on 2 as another way to disrupt your opponent. Silvergilla Adept to go up cards. I think that the deck should honestly move away from the lords. I think that there are better Merfolk to be playing that are more interactive.
Yeah.
And if you are disrupting your opponent and then getting in for like chip damage as you go along, that's going to do more work than having, a 2-mana 4/4, which is just like a 2-mana 4/4. If it was just blank, it's just not good enough, right? Yeah. And if you fill your deck with nothing but 2-mana 4/4s, you're just going to get stomped by like stuff that has just outclassed it, but for like they've just been power creeped out. And I think that if Merfolk is to evolve the way that other decks have evolved, like if you look at the other decks, Elves has gone through multiple iterations, but it also happens to have all of the powerful effects that that Merfolk doesn't get, right? Like between Glimpse and Natural Order, it just has free kills. Goblins has gotten significant upgrades between Muxus, between black cards that it's gained access to that do interact, right? Like the blue-black flash threat that can kill creatures or planeswalkers. Muxus is an auto win when it hits the table. You can burn people out without moving into combat with Siege Gang Lieutenant.
Yeah.
Like Hexcatcher is the biggest upgrade, and I think that it should just be inspiration for Merfolk to evolve the same way that the other decks have. Now, the other decks have evolved not necessarily because of innovations, although the new like more grindy elves is pretty innovative, but they've all gotten tools that they've just adopted, and then that's just made them go in the direction that they've gone. Whereas the only things that Merfolk has adopted is like, okay, you got TNN because that was easy. And then you got Svelin, and Svelin is just not good in a format where Swords to Plowshares is powerful because Indestructible just isn't as good. And a 3-mana 3/4 is also way below rate, even if it does have good abilities, but it's also slow. And I think that if Merfolk is going to evolve and actually step up to the times, it's got to be more interactive. And Hexcatcher is a really big step in that direction. And I think stuff like Trickster and stuff that just goes up more, gives you more card advantage, or stuff that lets you pick up those sort of tricky cards. I think that's really the space that Merfolk should go if they actually want to compete, because you can't just slam threats and hope that it's good enough anymore. It's just too slow.
Time will tell. I think you can. But I don't want to get into that argument on this episode because we've got so many more cards to check out. Let's talk about Leyline Binding. This is a 6-mana enchantment that has flash and domain. It costs 1 less for each basic land type you have in play, and it's an O-ring.
It's an O-ring, and like you and I had discussed previously, this is like the type of decks that would play this is pretty much a single kind of deck, and it's a deck that starts at, they're a mana base of Volcanic Island Savannah or Underground
a pile
Sea.
deck. Yeah,
it's definitely just got to be a pile deck. This is going to show up. If it shows up, it'll be in a deck that has horrendous mana.
Yep.
So unless we're in a space, unless there's something that we just don't see, I can't imagine, because like this is only good if you get it to be better than Prismatic Ending. And at 2 mana at flash speed, it's better than Prismatic Ending, right? Anything less than that, and it's or anything more than that rather, and it's not playable. So you have to be starting at
Another thing worth mentioning is that this cannot get hit by Prismatic Ending, which is worth mentioning.
It's a big deal. Yeah, it catches all the things that Prismatic Ending doesn't. Like, this card is good, but it's only good in a very specific kind of deck that's just going to get fucking wrecked by Wasteland. So, pick your spots, but like, when you see this, if this ever sees play, don't be surprised. It's just an O-ring. It's a good O-ring, but it's going to be limited to exactly like badly evolved decks.
Let's talk about our boy, the Raven Man. The Raven Man is a 2/1 for 2. That's 1 and a black. Legendary human wizard. At the beginning of each end step, if a player discarded a card this turn, create a 1/1 black bird token that can't block. And then it has an activated ability of tap it. And sorry, the Raven Man has an activated ability of tap it with 3 and a black, and each opponent discards a card, activate as a sorcery.
That's flavor text. The real ability here is that you can get a 1/1 bird every time you discard a card. I mean, it's whenever a player discards a card, but I imagine that you're just going to enable it. It's like play Raven Man, cycle a Streetway to make a 1/1. Like, that's incremental, and it's probably not strong enough, but like, it is powerful in that, like, if you just have a bunch of ways to discard, that you're just going to generate value off of them every turn. And it's at the beginning of each end step, so it will only trigger once, but it will trigger once
each turn step. Like it's each turn cycle, you can do it twice. And I think something we had thought of yesterday, and a card I just missed, but we're going to go back to, is Braids, Artisan Nightmare, or sorry, Arisen Nightmare.
I like Artisan now.
A 3/3 for 1 and 2 black. And it says at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. For each opponent who doesn't, they lose 2 life and you draw a card. So that works really well with Raven Man if you're doing the thing,
Yeah, you got to be doing the thing. I think that like Braids Arisen Nightmare is its own facet. I think Braids is kind of confined to just like bad tier 3 decks, but it is doing something that is reasonably powerful. It is in fast mana color. And I think that like the way to actually read Braids in Legacy is at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. If you do, your target player loses 2 life and you draw a card. Like, your opponent's never going to sacrifice something unless it's incidental for them, like unless it's free for them and doesn't actually affect them.
Yeah, for 2 life, unless they're at 2 life, they're going to keep their Murktide in play, right?
Yeah. So it's like if you have ways, and it's like if you're clearing their board, that's fine. Like if that's a removal spell, it's fine, right?
Yeah.
But like otherwise, this is a 3-mana 3/3 that's going to be a sacrifice outlet essentially, because it's a free sack outlet, even though it's only during your end step. That also goes up cards. But I think that Braids has more life than it may seem in Legacy, because if you can get that kind of engine going, having your own personal Howling Mine that's draining outside of combat for a deck that if you're sacrificing creatures and that's part of your engine, you're probably chip damaging them a bunch incidentally anyway.
Yeah.
And this feels like it's in that type of space where a deck that's trying to get that kind of grind going. Like I feel like if Nate were here, this would be a card that would be on Nate's radar for sure, right?
Yeah, 100%.
For stuff that he likes to do. I think that Braids does have some amount of legs. Like it is a really powerful ability. It's just that there isn't a deck that is competitively viable outside of FNM that would want this. But for those kinds of decks that like that kind of play style, this is a slam dunk for them. Back to the Raven Man. I think the Raven Man is going to be only powerful enough if you actually can leverage getting 2 birds a turn. So if you have an outlet, if you have a sacrifice outlet that doesn't cost you any cards that you can discard on your turn and your opponent's turn as a means to make 2 birds every turn, now we're talking. Like once you're making 2 1/1 flyers a turn, like if you're just lingering souls every turn cycle, the decks that have trouble with that are going to have a lot of trouble with that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where this kind of,
especially
the power
if you're getting
like
that kind of value off of like a lingering souls per se, you know, like
on top of it, I mean,
you're
like,
obviously going to discard into that on purpose. So you're going to be using cards that make that work.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that the stuff that this wants to do could also already protect it, you know, like discard spells are already something to protect this kind of threat that's very fragile. I mean, if I imagine that this would be a very low to the ground interactive deck that's looking for an engine.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, we thought about like Cookbook with Overchase Daredevil and as more Namartica as a means to like, because we were like, oh, Street Wraith, what decks want Street Wraith? And then if you're already, you know, you're not in Death Shadow because Death Shadow isn't trying to grind the same way that Raven Man is, but as Mora is. So it's like, okay, maybe that's something that you'd be interested in playing. Do I think Raven Man's going to show up? No. Would it be awesome if it did? Fuck yeah, it would.
Why? Because we know who Raven Man is. We're not
we
sure it for you.
We sure do.
So cool.
It turns out it is not Nicol Bolas.
Anyhow, let's talk about Temporary Lockdown, which is a 3-mana enchantment that says when it enters the battlefield, exile each non-land permanent with mana value of 2 or less, unless Temporary Lockdown leaves play. So it is a sort of a massive board wipe for 2 or less.
It's just a mass portable hole. Just portable hole is everything. So, I mean, we've already seen this type of effect be legacy playable. I mean, this is obviously legacy playable, but this is legacy playable in the same way that Hidetsugu, who consumes all, is playable, right? We've already seen that effect, but this is in a different color. I mean, double white is no small feat, but the fact that it gives access to control decks that aren't Grixis, this type of effect is really valuable at cleaning up shit like, you know, construct tokens, and if you've ever fallen behind, it's just a 3-mana Wrath. I think that this will also be very good because the decks that you want it against don't have easy times removing enchantments. Now, if you're playing it again, and particularly if you play it against decks that do, like, let's say you're playing against 8 cast and they have an Otawara and can bounce it, well, you've already swept up the constructs, right? That's the point of this thing. So you already have gotten the value there. And then if you're playing it against something like DNT, and then at some point they are able to remove it, then you're going to reset. You would reset their Aether Vials. You would their Mother of Runes would be summoning sick. This would have cleaned up a bunch of things. And then against something like Delver, it's like if you fall behind, this can clean up all of the threats that aren't Murktide and doesn't get Pyroblasted, and they're never removing an enchantment. So it has a bunch of crossover. It's not doing anything fantastic, but it's doing what a deck like what a control deck would want from a spell like this against a wide range of the playable matchups. And so I think this is so far like this card is 100% a slam dunk. This one will definitely see legacy play. It's just a matter of like in how many numbers and if it will ever crack main decks.
All right, so let's talk about the next card that looks playable. Squee, Dubious Monarch. That is a 3-mana 2/2 with haste. When Squee attacks, you put a +1/+1 goblin creature that's in play, tapped and attacking. And then basically Squee has escape for 4 mana and 4 cards.
Yeah, I wish they would just use escape. Obviously,
Yeah.
like that's my biggest pet peeve is WotC just not using mechanics that they already have. And they're like, well, players won't understand if it's not part of the set. We don't want to confuse them. We're going to talk about Ajani later, and Ajani's got completed on it as the only card in the set that has completed. So it's just a bunch of hypocrisy when they're like, yeah, we don't want to use certain things. We don't want to use mechanics we've already had because it will be confusing. Every single card is a fucking novel. What do you mean you don't want to confuse players?
Literally.
Anyway,
some of them you can even read ahead on.
My biggest pet peeve is that particularly they have cards that care about like specific keywords happening. The biggest one being Surveil. They have Surveil in literally every set these days, but they don't write Surveil, even though it's functionally the same effect. And then there are cards that trigger off of Surveil happening. So the fact like to deprive those types of cards those types of cards are extremely incidental. But if you had enough enablers, like playable Surveil cards that you'd want anyway, maybe people would consider them to be role players. And we just never got the opportunity because WotC has this weird thing where they're just like, yeah, we can't use mechanics that we've made. Anyway, back to Squee. Squee, I think, is also a slam dunk. It'll definitely see play, at least as one of in Goblins. I think it could also see as additional.
The Stompy decks.
Additional Stompy.
Your Chalice Stompy decks,
additional Goblin Rabble Masters in those types of decks. Like all of the text on this is good. It gives you value when it comes in. It gives you value going long. It's great to discard. Everything about this card seems awesome to me, and it will definitely see play.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about Founding the Third Path. Founding the Third Path is a saga for 1 and a blue, and it has read ahead. The read ahead lets you go to any part of the saga. And it says, you may cast an instant or sorcery card, sorcery spell, with mana 1 or 2 value from your hand without paying its mana cost when you cast it. And then 2 is target player mills 4 cards. And 3 is exile an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard, copy it, you may cast that copy.
So just to be clear, it's similar to like how Urza Saga specifically says 0 or 1. This thing specifically says mana value 1 or 2, not 1, 2 or less. You cannot activate your Ancestral Visions or cast your Ancestral Visions off of this. That's not part of this thing. So this is a cool card in that trying to figure out how to leverage all aspects of it is interesting. The first and third are pretty easy to identify, right? You want to cast a good spell, you want to flashback to a good spell.
I mean, the target player that mills is probably going to be you in Legacy, right?
That's right. And now figuring out the way to leverage that is really the big deal. I mean, I also like there are incidental things, like it gives me flashbacks to like when you would play Liliana the Last Hope in your deck and you'd brainstorm or ponder and then clear the 2 cards that you don't want using
sure. I mean, that happens.
You have incidental stuff like that. I think that like this a card like this would want to be in a deck that's trying to grind, and you obviously have Uro in that space, and that's all well and good. I think that the easiest home, like the first and foremost home that this sticks out to me in, would be in any type of Grixis control shell, because if you're playing it for the first ability, you want to maximize the mana that is generating for you, right? Like if you play it for 2 mana, you want to get 2 mana worth of ability. And the most powerful 2 mana instant and sorceries, right, I that you can play really, I think, are obviously Expressive Iteration and Hymn to Turok. And in those types of Grixis shells that are like sort of grindy, the biggest problem that those decks always have had is that their mana fucking sucks. It's just awful.
Not great,
Like trying to find double black early through Wasteland while also to fire off your Hymn to Turoks is awful. But Founding of the Third Path sort of fixes that problem, because now you can fetch basics, like let's say you would be in a Baleful Strix deck or whatever. You can fetch Island Swamp, play Founding of the Third Path, cast him to Turok. Now they know that to spend 2 turns later, they're going to get himmed again. That's going to change their behavior. That's going to change how they play. Likewise, this, like if you play this and then you have like later in the game and you have an expressive, like I'm sure, like obviously, okay, if you have it all rolled up, cool, but knowing that you're going to get that spell flashback later means that they are going to want to deal with this, because otherwise it's going to generate additional value, assuming that it has already generated some amount of value. Like if you play this and it cleans up your mana to hymn them early, and then they use a card to trade with this, then it is just you are at parity, but whatever it flash gave you the +1, which is what the rest of your deck is built on. Is that good enough? I don't know, but it is solving a problem that a deck has, right? The Grixis raw card control deck, the mana sucks, and Founding of the Third Path can make the mana a little bit easier for you. So it's possible to me that it would slot in there, but we'll see if that's a reasonable thing to be doing in today's Legacy.
Speaking of making the mana easier, we're going to go down to Joint Exploration. This is an instant for 1 in a blue. It has kicker green, and it says scry 2, then draw a card. If the spell is kicked, you can put a land to play from your a land into the battlefield from your hand.
Yeah, so this is just preordained plus an exploration effect, but it's at instant speed. I the only home that I can think of this in is very specifically for me. Like, I am the guy that wants to draw cards at instant speed to hit my miracles, but then also I want to offset land drop so I can play thwart. So, like, the idea of being able to play effectively a rampant, this is growth spiral that gives you selection.
It's a growth spiral that basically gives you selection. Yeah,
it's a growth spiral that gives you that has scry 2 tacked onto it.
Yeah.
And but it doesn't require green. Like, you can just play this as an instant speed preordained if you wanted to.
Exactly.
I like the effect. It's incidental. Is it going to be a mainstay in anything other than a specifically thing that I want to play? Probably not. But both effects are good. Both effects have shown that, like, they are legacy playable effects, and stamping them together at instant speed, it's interesting to me. I think that, like, if this one showed up, I wouldn't be surprised, but it's not like it's going to open up a new deck. It's just going to be a role player.
All right, so let's go down to the gold cards. Let's start with Ajani Sleeper Agent, which is a completed planeswalker that has a 4 loyalty. It is castable for 1, a green, Selesnya Phyrexian, and then a white. So you can cast it for 3, or you can cast it for 4. If you cast it for 3 and 2 life, it's a 2 loyalty. Otherwise, it's 4 loyalty. Its +1 is look at the top card of your deck. If it's a creature or a planeswalker, put it into your hand. The -3 is distribute 3 +1/+1 counters on up to 3 creatures. They gain vigilance until end of turn. And then the -6, its ultimate, is you get an emblem that says whenever you cast a planeswalker or a creature, target opponent gets 2 poison counters. This at first glance doesn't seem great, but we were talking about this in the context of Infect, and it actually has some legs in Infect, because I had been previously playing white in Infect to play Teferi Time Raveler. And this is kind of this is an interesting card because it gets you the creatures you're looking for in your deck. The -3 is very relevant. And obviously, if you get to that late game where you actually do end up ultimating this, you're just putting inevitability on the board. Like, these are cast triggers. These are not successfully cast triggers. If you're just slamming, like, casting dudes, your opponent might be dead. The number of times that I've been very close to winning a legacy match because my opponent was able to just lock me out of the game from attacking, but he had like 9 or 8 Infect, is huge. So I think this card actually has some legs for Infect.
Yeah, when we were talking about this yesterday, like, I came in thinking that, like, whatever, it's just an Ajani, like, planeswalker, it's not going to be very good. And then the more and more we talked about it, the more and more I was like, oh no, this seems like a slam dunk for Infect, because between noble,
every piece of text on this card is relevant for Infect.
Every piece of text is relevant, and the fact that you are a Noble Hierarch deck means that you can look at this as really a 2-drop planeswalker, right? Because if you lead with Noble Hierarch, you can cast this on 2, potentially go up a card, but even if you don't, now, like, when you, like, even if you miss, it gives you the scry. Like, if you don't put it into your hand, you can choose to put it on the bottom of your library, which isn't nothing when you're trying to assemble a combination of cards. The other fact is that because Noble Hierarch is actually in the colors that this wants to be in anyway, you're not going to necessarily be hard pressed for white mana, and the deck was already splashing white anyway, so it's not too bad. The thing that I think that we didn't discuss, obviously pumping your creatures is great. Obviously the emblem is great because that's how you're doing it. But the fact that it can give your opponent poison counters outside of combat is a whole nother access that Infect has never had in Legacy.
Let's not mention the fact that this also basically scries each turn too, because it's you may put it on the bottom of your library. If it's a pump spell and you don't need a pump spell at that time, you can put that on the bottom, and maybe you'll draw a guy next turn, you know?
And the thing is that if it is a pump spell, and that's what you do want, you can leave it there.
Yeah. I think the other thing I wanted to mention about this card is something that we talked about before that I kind of clued Phil into, is it messes with timing. And in fact, that's huge because you are basically a timing deck. It's all about using these tricks at the right time to bait your opponent into doing the wrong thing. So if you put out an Inkmoth Nexus and your opponent is like, okay, that's fine, then you activate it and then you -3 this to put 3 counters on an Inkmoth Nexus, your opponent's going to be like, well, I got to bolt that now. If they bolt that now, and then you use you didn't spend any mana yet aside from activating Inkmoth Nexus, and then you invigorate your Inkmoth Nexus, you now have a 7/7 an 8/8 Inkmoth Nexus that your opponent just tried to react to and failed. That's huge. You still have mana left over.
Yeah, I obviously I agree with the timing. I mean, you had played Infect, so you were cluing me into how navigating and compelling your opponent to act is really important.
Making them act before combat is just so huge, especially if you have reactions to it, because that means that, one, let's say you do -3 this and you don't have the pump spell, then you're not wasting any cards from your hand. One, like you're not trying to like bait your opponent. Like if you're not able to stop that, your opponent still had to waste a card on your guy one way or the other. That's you're at parity right there, right?
Yeah.
But if you get to a point where you're making your opponent make bad decisions, or worst case scenario, they try to bolt your guy and take 8 Infect, that's insane.
It's insane, yeah. And the thing is too is that like there are spots in Infect where there already seemed like every Infect deck that every list that I looked at was playing like some weird things. Like they were playing like additional pump spells, or they were playing that landfall artifact equipment, or they were playing like some Sylvan libraries or something. Like there seems to be some flexible slots in the main deck already.
Yeah,
that Ajani could slot right into. Yeah. The other thing that I think is really noticeable about the card that like I mean, to me it's noticeable because I usually am playing decks that like to go late, but we're talking about how this is good if you have a Noble Hierarch on turn 2, because you can just play it on your second turn and plus it, and now you have a 3 mana. You have a Walker on 3 that has a potentially is just going to draw a card every turn potentially, or just be its own pump spell. But if you let's say they've interacted with you, they've grind you down, and you have a bunch of lands in play, but you don't have any threats, and then you draw Ajani, you can also cast Ajani for 4 plus it, and now it's at 5, and Ultimate's at 6.
Yeah.
Like
that's ridiculous.
The Ultimate is fast, and particularly like I think that the reason why this card is going to be really strong in Infect is that it is both good early because of Noble Hierarch, but then it's even better late. Like it's not like it's the same at all points in the game.
Yeah,
this
card scales with how you're doing in the game.
The scale in the late game with the trajectory that Infect wants to play. Like ideally, they're dead before you need Ajani, right? But the fact that it's not dead early because of Noble Hierarch makes it that it's going to be good early and it's going to be very good late. Because if you are just at a stage where you have 4 or 5 lands in play off of 3 lands and a couple of Inkmoth Nexuses or whatever, and they have a Wasteland or whatever, and you don't want to fire off your Inkmoth Nexus and you just cast this. Again, this card can beat them through combat. And now you can think about sandbagging. Like you can just like keep them off of removals. Like if they have removal spells, like if you're just checked out, you can
Another thing to think about is that this adds yet another angle that your opponent has to deal with. And that means they might have to use their lightning bolt on this and not your guy. So there's just a lot here that you're able to negotiate a game with that Infect players really never had access to before.
And if you're playing against like all of the spells that are playable in Legacy right now that would remove a Planeswalker like Ajani, Lightning Bolt, Prismatic Ending, those cards are all cards that they have to point at your creatures.
Yeah. They
have to point them at your creatures, otherwise they die, and they die fast. So it just stresses your opponents. And like of all of the cards that we've talked about, I get that Ajani is only good for specifically one deck, and that's Infect.
That's it.
But man, is it feel like it's going to be such a power up, like to the point where I'm like, oh, maybe I want to like get these cards and like try Infect out as like an alternative when I'm feeling a little bit more aggressive. Like it just opens up so many new windows for like the same way that we were talking about how, or at least I was talking about how the Horde Master doesn't help goblins in a meaningful way that they aren't already good at.
Yeah,
I think Ajani is on the
opposite
end
of that. Yeah,
exactly. This gives Infect a whole new path of action that it didn't have access to before, in really like both in terms of card advantage and in terms of being able to kill your opponent outside of combat. Like I think Ajani might be the best card for any Legacy deck in this set.
Yeah, I agree.
Even though Infect has totally
it's
fallen
so
out of the
funny
meta,
how 24 hours ago you were like, I don't know why we're talking about this card, and now it's like, oh my god, right?
Yeah, it really was. Like I came to when we first recorded, I came to it not thinking. I didn't really think too deeply about Ajani, and then as we were talking about it, I was like, oh fuck, it's good here. Oh fuck, it's good here. Oh shit, it's good there. Like everything about it is just like all of the abilities are relevant. The casting cost on both ends, both cheaper and more expensive, are relevant because if you think about, it's like I think about this as it's a 3-mana walker that. If you has kicker that you can turn, it's a 3-mana walker that has kicker for an additional Selesnya mana. That if you kick it, it gets +2 loyalty.
Yeah,
you know, like everything about this card is just an absolute fucking home run for Infect. And like I have lost more games to Infect than any other person on this planet. And I am excited that they're getting this card, right? Like, I think this is great. I think it's great.
Let's move on from Ajani and talk about Meria, Scholar of Antiquity. This is a 3/3 for 1, a red and a green. And it says tap an untapped non-token artifact creature artifact you control to add a green, or tap 2 non-token artifacts you control to exile the top card of your library. You can play it this turn.
You know, this card, I mean, obviously these effects are like exceptional, right? But they are exceptional in a combo deck similar to what like Riddlesmith Construct Containment Construct are doing, where it just wants all of the zeros and then it just wants to spam through its whole fucking library, right? Like it just wants to go off.
Yeah,
and it's in color. It's in a
colors that don't normally do this, right?
That don't normally do this. So I don't think that I think the color restrictions are really the biggest problem. But I mean, you're going to be playing it in a deck with Mox Opal. Yeah. You're going to have like fast mana anyway. I think that the place where this would be tough is the decks normally that are playing all of these kinds of 0-mana artifacts to try and combo off are also playing Ancient Tomb.
Mm-hmm.
And Meria does not work with Ancient Tomb all that well.
It's true.
So it's possible that stemming off of the tree of like the Baubles plus Mox Opal plus Lotus Petal combo deck, like 0-mana combo deck that like folds to Chalice or whatever, I think this is just going to be like another addition to that family tree of that style of deck where you can move over and then you get things like Ancient Stirrings in green and access to good green sideboard cards. Like, I think that this might just make us explore what other options there are for green things that care about artifacts. Because tapping 2 non-token artifacts to exile the top card of your library and play it, you can play lands, you can play other cheap artifacts to continue storming off, essentially. I mean, my hopes are high for Meria. I think it's going to be more or less glass cannon, but I think it'll be, if it finds a home, it'll be just as good as Riddlesmith Containment Construct, and that has proven to be a pretty reasonable combo deck in Legacy.
So, okay, so next I want to talk about 2 cards that we can just touch on for like a half a second. One's Ivy Gleeful Spellthief, which is a green and a blue, flying, 2/1. Whenever a player casts a spell that targets only a single creature other than Ivy Gleeful Spellthief, you may copy that spell. The copy targets Ivy. So this is interesting for a couple reasons. Obviously, if you're... It's weird because it's not Infect, so it would work good with an Infect deck, but it doesn't have Infect as a thing on it, so that doesn't really work. But also when your opponents are casting spells to target their stuff, which doesn't happen that often. If there was a Auras deck in the format, this would be great because it actually does copy the Aura.
Yeah, because a copy of an Aura becomes a token. I mean, that's the case with any permanent. Yeah. I mean, I think that this is a potential to, like, I feel like what this wants to be is just Infect, right? Like that space is already sort of taken up by Infect, but like, let's say you play a Spell Thief and then you you become Immense, right?
Yeah,
like, theoretically, like this plus become Immense should just be a kill, right?
Yeah,
but like that's like the play
Berserk,
pattern,
you know.
Yeah, like that's the play pattern that Infect already wants. If we didn't have Ajani in this set, I would say, how likely is it that there's a possibility to play what is effectively an Infect deck without the Infect creatures, right? Because the limiting factor of Infect is that the creatures suck, right?
Well,
like that's honestly like Glistener Elf and what's the blue one?
Glistener Elf and Blighted Agent.
Blighted Agent, like those cards are not good by themselves. They're only good because they have Infect, which is effectively double strike, but it's only double strike when it hits an opponent. Yeah. So those cards are just bad. Like they are not good cards, but they are good when you build your entire deck around them.
Yeah.
But like I like if Ajani wasn't just such a level up for Infect, Ivy would have made me think like, is there a way to play the Infect deck without playing Infect creatures?
The answer is you sideboarded True Name Nemesis, and you would never deal with this card otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, it is possible though that like had Infect not already had this space, like Ivy Gleeful Spellthief might have been able to spawn a new deck,
possibly
that plays in that kind of like one shot kill you type of, like that blazing shoal type thing. You know what I mean?
It's certainly something to think about, but I wouldn't think about it too hard.
Well, no, because we have Infect. But like, if Infect didn't get any upgrades, right? If it was just, I was like, well, Infect has fallen off the face of the earth. Like maybe Ivy is the way to play that style of deck where you're trying to combo kill in combat with all of the protective effects, and because if they try and interact with this, and the same way that if you pump spell to protect it, and then it just doubles the pump spell. Like that's fucking nuts, right?
Yeah,
like
it's wild. All right, let's talk about Jhoira, Ageless Innovator. That is a 2/3 for a blue and a red. Tap to put 2 Ingenuity counters on her, and then you can put an artifact with mana value equal to X or less, where X is the number of Ingenuity counters on her. So from your hand. From your hand. I did that yesterday too. From your hand. So this is interesting in that it like kind of mana cheats and enables stuff, but I'm just not sure where it would go, but it looks like a really interesting card.
So I'm gonna put a pause on this card, because obviously this card, if you get to untap with it, theoretically the goal should be that you win the game on the spot, right? Like you should be building your deck that some combination of cards after you untap with this will just enable you to win the game on the spot. That being said, and all of the talk about Eric Virgo that we've done on this cast so far, he messaged me the other night and was like, he sent me a picture of this card and was like, wow, the combo potential with this card. And then that's it. Like, the conversation has, we have not continued what that is yet. So I'm going to pause on this card for a future episode with Eric Virgo, where he is just going to explain to us the specific interaction of this plus X other cards that win on the spot when you untap.
Yep.
Let's go.
All right. Let's go all the way down to Karn's Sylex. It's a 3-mana legendary artifact that enters the battlefield tapped. It says players can't pay life to cast spells or to activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. And then X and tap, exile it to destroy each non-land permanent with a mana value of X or less. Activate only as a sorcery. So this is like Pernicious Deed, right?
It's Pernicious Deed. It's a colorless Pernicious Deed. Except it comes into play tap. So theoretically, if you have enough mana and wanted to activate it at the same turn, you couldn't. The real payoff to this card is the fact that it's also a prison piece. Players can't play life or cast spells or activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. That means that it shuts off fetch lands, it shuts off Force of Will. Like those are relevant things. So but it doesn't shut off your Ancient Tomb, because Ancient Tomb is a mana ability. So even though you pay life for it, it's still a mana ability. So
it does stop fetch lands, which is
it stops fetch lands. And but the deck the prison decks that might play something like this aren't playing fetches, right? Yeah. And they're not playing Force of Will. So this just being an additional lock piece that also does sort of like the what's the stone that blows up everything?
Oblivion Stone.
Oblivion Stone. This does a similar thing to Oblivion Stone for like what Tron does in Modern. This could do for Legacy, as in that even though this does sweep up your like chalices and shit, if you're playing in the space of like I'm trying to play the Mud Prison deck, there are more answers to Chalice than ever, right? Mm-hmm. And the fact that like if you play this and also have Chalice, they're probably just locked out anyway, because now they don't have fetches, they don't have Force of Will, and they're locked out of Chalice. Yeah. So you may not even need to activate it at all. But the fact that it has the ability to clean shit up means that, like, similar to Temporary Lockdown, I think this is also going to see play 100%. It's not going to necessarily spawn new archetypes, but it will level up the archetypes that are interested in these kind of prison style effects.
Yeah.
Quick thought on Weatherlight Compleated.
Oh yeah, go ahead. We have a minute left.
We have a minute left. It's a 2-mana 5/5 flyer that says as long as it's a vehicle, it says as long as Weatherlight Completed has 4 or more Phyresis counters on it, it's a Phyrexian creature in addition to its other types. Whenever a creature you control dies, put a Phyresis counter on Weatherlight Completed, then draw a card if it has 7 or more Phyresis counters on it, and if it doesn't, scry 1. Now, is this card good enough? No. But it is cool for like those decks that we were talking about before, where if you're looking for an engine that relies on sacrificing fodder, this is whenever
One
a
more piece of the
creature
puzzle, yeah.
Whenever a creature you control dies, it doesn't say non-token. So there are ways that this is a means to like. Now, granted, a 2-mana 5/5 flyer, you have 2-mana 8/8 flyers in this format, right?
Exactly.
Which is why I don't think this. Which is why I don't think this card's going to make it. But it is cool that if you have an engine going, right? Like, let's say you have, I mean, the thing that came to mind when I first read this card was like, oh, if you have, Gravecrawler and Altar of Phyrexia, or Phyrexian Altar, and you just have essentially you can infinite sack, right, and infinite storm, but then you need a payoff. That this is a colorless payoff that, as you do that means that you'll get to draw your deck.
Yeah.
So like in that regard, that's something like that is cool. Like in a way where if you just have an engine that can sacrifice creatures ad nauseum, that this just becomes 2-mana draw your deck, and that's kind of cool. Like that's where I think that this is pretty interesting. I mean, it's not going to do that because you have to sack a creature 4 times first before it does anything, but still a cool card. Anyway, moving on.
All right, I think that's it for us. We know that there are got to be a couple other gems in here, so comment, hit us up on the Discord, join our Discord. We just updated the link, so the link should be working again. And that's it. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. That stuff helps out a ton. Check out MoxField. I think that's everything.
That's everything.
That's everything. All right.
Later.
Later
Peace.
on.
Deuces.
Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out this other video. You'll probably like it.